Anin and Buju and Denoy Maganadok. Wesley Ballinger and Niiyogiizhig Niiyogiizhig Indigo. Migazin Dude, Mississauga Ganin, Ishinakate Ishkunagan Unjabayan. Hello, my relatives. My name is Wesley Ballinger. My Ojibwe name is Niiyogiizhig. I am Eagle Clan, and I am from the Mille Lacs band of Ojibwe. My father is a Mille Lacs band member. My mother is a Jaganashikwe, a white lady. So, as you can tell, I have some mixed ancestry. But I think that is an experience most of us can really relate to, being Native. And it actually kind of plays into how we define our indigeneity and where we find our belonging in our Native communities. So a little bit more about myself. I grew up both in Minneapolis and then on the res on Mille Lacs. I would split time. My parents were separated when I was very young, so I would spend summers with my dad and my grandmother up in Mille Lacs, and the rest of the time I would spend with my mother in Minneapolis. And back then, an era called the 1980s, reservations didn't really have casinos. They didn't have a lot of resources behind the community development. So we were really living a poor life, but I didn't realize we were poor. We were just family. We just lived in a community. Everyone would come over. We would share our food. We would have oga, walleye, jishib, duck. Once in a while, waboos, rabbit. I remember rabbit stew a lot as a youngster. Wawashkeshi, deer, venison meat, wawashkeshi wias. And that was basically what life was. My grandmother, my grandfather, at the time I didn't know it, but they must have been pretty well off for the community because we had a nice yard, some chicken coops in the back. We lived on a place called Bug Hill, and at that time there was only 3 houses, so we had a lot of place to play, woods to play in, swamps. We go berry picking, go hunting in the fall time, taguaging, and that was pretty much life as I knew it as a Mille Lacs band member growing up. Well, when I was in the city, even though I'm light skinned compared to my brothers, sisters, cousins, aunties, and uncles, I always identified as Anishinaabe, or back then I said Indian. That's how we always refer to ourselves, as Indian. And I was the Indian kid on the block. And we lived in a fairly white neighborhood. There was one African American kid who lived on our block. And that's pretty much as far as like our racial diversity in a nutshell. And so there was some teasing going on because, as kids are wont to do, they'll tease you and find things to pick on you. And that's just part of growing up, Not saying that it's right or wrong, but I think we all felt that ribbing, that teasing as we're growing up. Well, as I got older and older, I think I was about 9 years old when I first really realized the difference in my experience as someone growing up with mixed ancestry and my cousins and my brothers and sisters' experience growing up on the reservation in kind of a monocultural community, Ojibwe, Native American community. And that difference really showed itself through racism. See, we would have to living on the Mille Lacs reservation. There's a big lake. Most of you probably know of Mille Lacs. It's about 100 miles north, large lake. But as community members, we had to go down and we had to ask the cabin owners who owned all the shoreline back then. And the people who owned the shoreline were white people. And so we would have to go ask their permission to go swimming off their docks. And I remember this one time, I had to walk down this forest road, and this car came, or this truck came uh, speeding up and stopped and asked what we were doing. And he looked me up and down. He looked my two cousins up and down. And we asked if we could go swimming. And he did another double take. And he looked at us both, and he took a hard look at me. And then he said, I guess it's all right. Then he took off. Now, I didn't notice anything at the time. But my two cousins, they saw it right away. And they said, did you see that? And I didn't know what they were talking about. And they said, the only reason why that guy's letting us swim on his dock is because you're white. And at that point, it really hit me that this difference of skin color that really plays in a part of this identity of how we see ourselves. Or maybe not how we see ourselves, but how others see us. And because how other people see us, that affects how we see ourselves, is I guess more accurate to say. So from 9 years old, for a good number of years, I really had a lot of questions in my mind. I felt shunned a little bit, I guess, like I didn't really belong. So this whole sense of community, right? And we didn't have a lot of representation of Native people, Native scholars, social justice warriors, positive role models within our community, especially in Minneapolis. You know, we had a lot. You're dealing with a lot of socioeconomic pressures, forced relocation, institutionalized poverty when it comes to Native Americans. So all the Native folks I saw growing up were either in Little Earth, living on the streets, or just being homeless. Yeah. So I always kind of felt like this sense of shame growing up, because I would see these people who were down and out, and that connected to me because that's how I always saw myself and my family. And it really messed with my ego and my self-esteem. And there were no books really were readily available that taught language and culture. Of course, we did have the AIM movement, which was still relatively, fresh in my memory as it started in the 70s. And as a young person in the 80s, it was still talked about lively. Not so much today. I think there's a resurgence happening with the Red Power movement, AIM, and Idle No More, Missing and Murdered, Indigenous Women. A lot of these organizations are really highlighting these social inequalities and social justice reforms. But as a young man, young kid, I didn't have any of these positive reinforcements. And I felt over the years I grew more angrier and angrier. And when I became a teenager, I pretty much stopped going to the reservation, seeing my father. My grandma died when I was about 9, 10 years old. And so I didn't have so many relatives to go and visit so much. And I felt neglected. I felt rejected. Still having that same memory of that time walking down to the lake and having my family see me as different because of the tone of my skin. But deep down, I always was something ingrained in me that I was an Anishinaabe, that I am Indian, that I am Ojibwe, that I am a Mille Lacs band member. I mean, it's my family, my community. My first memories are from the reservation in my grandmother's house. And so by the time I got to high school, I was all messed up. And I think a lot of high school kids are trying to figure out who they are, trying to find where they're going, what their role is, find their own power in the world. And I was very fortunate to have access to an Ojibwe language class. I went to South High, Minneapolis. And my language teacher, Don P. Washabun, he had a kind-hearted man. I always remember his smile and his jokes, And that's something that I'll touch upon again and again, is humor and having a smile, or using humor as a means of survival in a lot of adversity. But when I started getting into the language, I did it to kind of like prove I was a better Indian than my father, or that I was a better Indian than, my cousins, my brothers and sisters. And so I did fairly well in the language. And as I got more and more in the language, that animosity, that toxicity of why I was taking the language changed. It changed something in me. I found a lot of healing. I found connections reestablished to my family, to um, my sense of self, my idea of who I was, my dreams, my ambition in life. You know, as a growing up, I always was interested in the arts, and I always wanted to be an artist. So today I do illustrations for children's books and for language revitalization. And when I was in university, I took art, and that was what I wanted to do. I was going to major in art, but the Ojibwe language was always there. And I took Ojibwe language as a personal investment. I never saw myself as being a language teacher or working in language revitalization. It was a means of repairing, reclaiming, repatriating something that had been lost, and that it was empowering for me to find. And through my journey of the language, I was able to be exposed to our ceremonies, doing the Madudu Swan, the sweat lodge, going fasting, doing some of our harvesting activities, Minumina when Niiyogiizhig trapping, ricing and trapping, Giyose when hunting, Mawinzo berry picking. And through these connections, I found reinforcement in creation, in every little thing in our environment. And so, like our elders and our teachers talk about, we are connected to everything in creation. We, as Anishinaabe people, are the weakest animal on the planet. And we need the love and the kindness and the pity of all other animals and all other creatures for us to survive. We don't have the claws, we don't have the teeth, we don't have the best eyes, we don't have the best nose, we don't have fur, so we'll freeze in the wintertime, we can't dig as well in the earth or through the trees, we don't have a great sense of smell, so we can't track our food through the forest. So it was through the love of our relatives in the forest, Wawashkeshi, Waboos, Mittagug, the trees, the deer, the rabbit, the trees, Beneshi, the birds, all of these relatives, Gigu, the fish, they gave of themselves. They took pity on us. And so through honoring this relationship, this connection to everything around us, I found a core belief and a core connection of what it means to be native, what it means to be indigenous. Our philosophy, our cosmology, how we see life, and where we are in the whole of existence, and what our place here on this little marble that we call Earth, the Mama King, our Mother Earth. And we are interconnected, we are a family. And through the use of our sema, our tobacco, when we give something, when we ask for something, we give our sema. And in that, it reinforces our connection to relying on one another, to being interconnected, to community. So that's part of what I see as being native to me, is the community, and understanding and respecting how we are all interconnected. And so as I go through the language, I realize that it's really affecting my artwork and how I see how everything is interconnected together. When we talk about words like old lady, Mindamuye, the one who holds us together. We talk about the old man, Akiwenzi, to be from the earth. So these Ojibwe words invoke pictures in your mind when you get to know the language more and more. You see how the words are constructed to have a relationship to what's happening, or descripting or describer of what the thing is, or how it interacts with something else. And so the language for the first speakers creates this image in their mind. And so the language can be very funny. And if you ever have the privilege of talking with the first speaker, and they share their knowledge of the language, well, sometimes they'll start laughing because they'll come up with a word and they'll see it in their mind. And you can come up with new words too, because that's how complex the Ojibwe language is. The Ojibwe language is 75% verbs and 25% nouns, and it's almost the exact opposite of English. And the crazy thing about Ojibwe is there's 6,000 ways to conjugate a verb. So it's in the top 10. It used to be the hardest language to learn as far as Guinness Book of World Records was concerned, but I think over the years they found new languages and discovered, linguists always like to play with the list and all that, but it's still a pretty difficult language to learn because of the complexities of conjugation and the complexities of morphemes, of having these sounds, these small sounds that transmit meaning, and you connect them all together, right? So the Ojibwe language kind of really shaped how I approached artwork. And so I've had the privilege of working on a couple of pretty nice language revitalization projects. The Niiyogiizhig, Minodudarin, Anishinaabe, Hungry Johnny, just to name a couple. And through my work with the language led me to be a TA for the language at the University of Minnesota, which led me to spending 3 summers in a First Nation community in Canada, learning more about ceremonies, learning more about cultural practices and histories and mores, philosophies, and everything about that. During this time, I received my Anishinaabe name, Niiyogiizhig, and I was reaffirmed as to what my clan was, Miigizeh and Dude. And so these two things, a name and a clan, were very powerful, very strong medicine for me. Like I said, as I was growing up, I felt rejected. I felt like an outcast. And having that name really reinforced who I was. See, your spirit name, the Creator gives you this name, and you go through ceremony to receive this name. And so Niiyogiizhig is the 4th level of the sky, and the 4th level is also where the eagles fly. So having that name and with my clan, it really cemented who I am in my identity. And through fasting, I've been out fasting a few times, having powerful dreams and experiences, connecting with the water, the land, the trees, the birds, the fish, the 4-legged, the crawlers, the flyers, the swimmers, the growers, to reinforce this connection of community and interconnectedness. And as I grow, I was able to heal with my family as well, understanding this interconnectedness. Living in 2 worlds, right? We have our Jaganashi, this white world, this Euro-American world, this urban world. And that's not to say that Native Americans don't live in an urban setting, because many of us do. And then the res world, right? The res communities. And oftentimes those 2 communities play upon each other. They fight with who's more Indian, who's more Native, right? You can't be, if you don't live on the res, if you're not from a community of reservation experience, then you're not Native. Or if you're not from an urban area, you don't understand the urban experience of being Native American. So oftentimes we'll be at war with ourselves, like fighting who's more Indian, who's more Indigenous. Well, at the same time, the U.S. government plays this battle against us as well with blood quantum and having to justify in our own DNA, in our own body, what it means to be Native American, what it means to be Indian. And so we can have this talk about being an ethnic identity of being Native American, but we also have this political identity of being Native American, where you are a tribal citizen and you belong to a federally recognized tribe. And this all plays into that blood quantum. And you have to be so much blood quantum, so much percentage of your blood has to be of indigenous ancestry. But we have plenty of people out there who are Native who don't belong to a tribe, who aren't tribal members. They have family that comes from this community over here. They have family that comes from this community over here, and some family that comes from this community over here. And the total makeup, if you ever follow that, DNA testing, Ancestry, Me, or 23andMe or whatever, myancestry.com, you'll see a lot of people come back, well, I'm, 65% Native American, but it doesn't tell you what tribe you're from, what community from, what band. It just says Native American, right? Well, the U.S. government doesn't care about that unless you're enrolled in a federally recognized tribe. And they do that by separating us, dividing us up into quantum. If you're 25%, if you're half, or if you're 75%. Now, I only know of very, very, very few full-blooded Anishinaabe or Indigenous people living in the United States. So we're never going to get back to that full-bloodedness, this idea of like you have to be full-blood to be Native. So what does being Native mean? It means being connected to a community. It means honoring your ancestry. It means a shared experience. It means language. Language is the single most important component to carry your culture. How you explain who you are, where you are, when you are, in your mother tongue is a very important and powerful concept into understanding indigeneity, into your nativeness. And through that, we have our ceremonies that reinforce also who we are. We have our ceremonies, our naming ceremonies, our first kill ceremonies, our own wedding ceremonies. Our birthing ceremonies, our harvest ceremonies. There's pretty much a ceremony for everything because we have to honor that relationship. Because that's what that ceremony is all about, is honoring our relationship at that particular time with that particular thing that's happening. So I wanted to share an important ceremony in my life and for my daughter's life. So I have a 5-year-old daughter. Her name is Yara. But when she was about 9 months old, we had a naming ceremony for her. And we invited a friend and a mentor to me who I respect dearly, Pebama Benes, Dennis Jones. And we presented him with a sema and some gifts just to talk about him being a namer to our daughter. And so he agreed. He would take on that role, that task, that job, because it's an important task, and it's a serious thing to do. And it's very important if you are in search of a namer, that you find someone who is skilled and knowledgeable within the language, because that spirit name is very important. It holds a lot of power. And so Pebama Benes, he thought on it for a couple weeks, and he had an experience while he was smoking his pipe, his opwagan. And through this experience, he realized that the name had come to him, and he shared that name with us through a naming ceremony. And it was so important for us and so important for me to provide this for my daughter, because like I said earlier, that name, when that moment came for me to have a name, had so much power because it really erased so much negativity in my life, and it did a lot of healing. But how much power would there be if you didn't even have that hurt, that toxicity? And that name gives you that strength. So we had this ceremony. We invited all of our friends, and we invited some people who we wanted to sit in as basically co-sponsors or people who we admired, people who we thought would show as a role model their life, the way they lived their life and approach things in their life, that they were a role model. And through the pipe and through the drum and through the sema, we had that naming ceremony. So my daughter's name is Oza Wanakwaduk, which means Golden Cloud Woman. But with the name also comes, she has helpers. Wagush is a fox. That's one of her helpers. And Amu, a bee. So she has, we all have helpers in our lives. We have spirit helpers. Whether we know it or not, they're there to show us a sign. Whether we see it or not, that sign is there. And it's not whether we have a choice to see it, but whether we have the inclination, the patience, the foresight to see it. And so in her name, Golden Cloud Woman, Oza Wanakwaduk, it also, this name shows itself in the morning through the golden embers of the sun shining through the clouds, and through the evening, the sunset. But also, it also talks about kind of like a silver lining, a silver glow, or a glow around the cloud. So it talks about optimism. It talks about solace in a turbulent world, about finding peaceful resolutions and finding kindness in others. So this name has all these attributes that are going to maybe be personified in her, or the name personified something that's in my daughter. But as she carries through her life, walks through her life, she has this name, and she has something that is completely Anishinaabe, completely indigenous, that is hers, that is personal, that she is connected to. Whether she makes that hard choice to seek out the language, whether she makes that choice to live within the Anishinaabe community or to follow Anishinaabe teachings, we all have these personal choices. We are still indigenous. We are still native, though, even without these active acts of culture. But this name is something powerful, and she can carry it forward with her. And so, having my daughter go through this, and remembering me growing up, not having a lot of positive symbols I can hold on to of what it means to be Indian, let alone what it means to be Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. That really inspired me to continue on with doing children's illustration, working on language revitalization material that really focus on like pre-K to elementary school education. So we can really have these nice, shiny, beautiful things that are Ojibwe, that are Anishinaabe, that are indigenous and native, so that we can look at and say, we deserve this. I deserve this. We aren't secondhand. We aren't cast away. We aren't thrown away. We aren't conquered. We didn't lose a war. We are still here. We are still here through resiliency. We are still here through acts of genocide, through backstabbing and theft and murder and terrorizing. We are still here. And through living through all this adversity comes that sense of humor that I talked about earlier. And some of the funniest people in my life are Native Americans. And it's the ability to wisecrack at a situation where other people would break down and cry. I think without having our ingrained sense of humor, we would have gone insane a couple generations ago. And if we couldn't laugh at the travesty and the misery and just the ridiculousness of what is happening, we would just disappear into sorrow. But that's not to say that we don't take things serious, because we are serious and we are on the forefront of fighting for land rights, environmental rights, water quality, being stewards of the land, which is something really ingrained into who we are as protecting our ancestors, protecting our relatives, protecting that family, that interconnectedness, that gakana auya, that everything, that everyone. The circle that we draw around ourselves is a circle we draw around our community, a circle we draw around our family, in a larger sense, a circle we draw around the entire earth, and that we are all family. So when I greeted you, I said, Indinoe Magnaduk, my relatives, because we are all related. We all come from the Creator. So I want to say, Miigwech Bizin Daoyeg. Thank you for listening. That's it.
Yeah.